Then the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had done before at Gibeon. The Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your petition. I have set this temple apart to be holy, this place you have built where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. I mean, this was basically going to be the new, more permanent tabernacle, and God had, a special favor on the tabernacle, so it's kind of not really a surprise that God would have a similar attitude toward this temple that Solomon has built. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay. We are looking at 1 Kings chapter 9. Let's see here. Context to be aware of, Solomon is king of Israel. Since things have been peaceful with him as king, in large part due to David's actions before him, Solomon has been able to build a temple to the Lord and a palace for himself, which the temple took like 7.5 years. The palace took 13 years. But all that in the past couple of chapters has been completed. They dedicated the temple to the Lord. And Solomon kind of asked for a special blessing upon it in a way, requesting that any prayers of God's people prayed in the direction even of the temple be heard and answered. Otherwise, I think that's about all the context we need to know going into this. I think last chapter was the one where they dedicated the temple. So, let's hop into 1 Kings chapter 9 here. So Solomon finished building the temple of the Lord, as well as the royal palace. He completed everything he had planned to do. Then the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had done before at Gibeon. The Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer and your petition. I have set this temple apart to be holy, this place you have built where my name will be honored forever. I will always watch over it, for it is dear to my heart. Okay, so yeah, last chapter, as I kind of already mentioned when explaining context, Solomon, asked for a special blessing on the temple, for prayers in the direction of the temple to be blessed. So, after all that was done, and it was dedicated and everything, then God appears to Solomon, possibly in a dream. I think it was in a dream the first time. So if it's saying as he had done before, it's probably also in a dream. But basically God's saying, all right, I've heard you, and yes, this temple will be blessed. Quote, for it is dear to my heart. I mean, this was basically going to be the new, more permanent tabernacle, and God had, a special favor on the tabernacle, so it's kind of not really a surprise that God would have a similar attitude toward this temple that Solomon has built. Okay. Then we get to verse 4. As for you, if you will follow me with integrity and godliness, as David your father did, obeying all my commands, decrees, and regulations, then I will establish the throne of your dynasty over Israel forever. For I made this promise to your father David, one of your descendants will always sit on the throne of Israel. But if you or your descendants abandon me and disobey the commands and decrees I have given you, and if you serve and worship other gods, then I will uproot Israel from this land that I have given them. I will reject this temple that I have made holy to honor my name. I will make Israel an object of mockery and ridicule among the nations. And though this temple is impressive now, all who pass by will be appalled and will gasp in horror. They will ask, why did the Lord do such terrible things to this land and this temple? And the answer will be, because his people abandoned the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and they worshipped other gods instead and bowed down to them. That is why the Lord has brought all these disasters on them. Double end quote there. Much like previous agreements or covenants, there's sort of a contingency on, the people following God. If they follow, then yes, the temple will stay, solid, dedicated to the Lord. It'll have that blessing that Solomon asked for. And more than that, if Solomon and his descendants obey the Lord, follow his commands, then God is promising that one of them, their family line, will continue to sit on the throne forever. But if they disobey, then all this calamity will happen. The Israelites themselves are going to be exiled. I mean, if it doesn't say it here, it has said that in previous covenants. And now he's even more specifically saying the temple will be just destroyed, or at least otherwise damaged to the point of people passing by and asking, what happened here? Why is this temple such a disaster? And it'll be because of the people abandoning their God. I guess there's not really too much else I have to say about that. It's a lot like other covenants that have been made previously in the Old Testament. I guess also including sort of the continuation of the covenant that God made with David about, descendants sitting on the throne of Israel. Okay. Then we'll move on to verse 10. It took Solomon 20 years to build the Lord's temple and his own royal palace. At the end of that time, he gave 20 towns in the land of Galilee to King Hiram of Tyre. Hiram had previously provided all the cedar and cypress timber and gold that Solomon had requested. But when Hiram came from Tyre to see the town Solomon had given him, he was not at all pleased with them. "What kind of towns are these, my brother?" he asked. So Hiram called that area Kabul, which means worthless, as it is still known today. Nevertheless, Hiram paid Solomon 9,000 pounds of gold. There's going to be notes about that we'll get into here in a bit. So back, I want to say it was chapter 3 or 4, it mentioned this agreement between King Hiram of Tyre and Solomon. Basically, them making an alliance to work together to build the temple, really. But I guess David and Hiram had also been on good terms, so really that just kind of continued. It mentioned specifically before about the wood coming from Tyre I don't know if it exactly mentioned the gold coming from Tyre. But, nevertheless, it's going into that here. So, I guess as part of the agreement, what's not mentioned here is that, you know, there were arrangements made for Solomon to provide food, at least, for King Hiram and his palace throughout the building projects, which took 20 years. Going by what it said in the previous chapters, technically 20 and a half, but close enough. But so, I guess, as an additional thanks, now that all this is done, Solomon wants to give some of these towns to Hiram. And I guess Hiram ultimately accepts them, but he's like, hey, these towns aren't great. Actually, more than that, he calls them worthless. Okay, now let's get into the notes here. So, nevertheless, Hiram paid. Okay. Could read, for Hiram had paid 9,000 pounds. Hebrew says 120 talents of gold. So, now, whether this gold that was part of the payment was stuff that was used in the construction projects, I'm not sure. But either way, so like, especially the way that it's worded in these notes, it almost makes it sound like, you know, Solomon and Hiram were on good terms, so Solomon's like, hey, thanks for all your help. I'm going to give you these towns as part of a thanks if you're willing to pay for them. Either that or it was in exchange for the gold that had already been given as part of other things, I don't know. In any case, there was an exchange of gold. And for that, Solomon says, here, I'd like you to have these towns. Since they were on good terms, Hiram might have just kind of accepted it on good faith. And then he actually sees the towns and is like, what is this? This is basically worthless. These are towns full of nothing or not really worth anything. But because the agreement had already been made and maybe he didn't want to cause any extra trouble or anything, he just kind of accepted it anyway. Okay, then we get on to verse 15. This is the account of the forced labor that King Solomon conscripted to build the Lord's temple, the royal palace, the supporting terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, and the cities of Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had attacked and captured Gezer, killing the Canaanite population and burning it down. He gave the city to his daughter as a wedding gift when she married Solomon. So Solomon rebuilt the city of Gezer. He also built up the towns of Lower Beth-horon, Baalath, and Tamar in the wilderness within his land. He built towns as supply centers and constructed towns where his chariots and horses could be stationed. He built everything he desired in Jerusalem and Lebanon and throughout his entire realm. Okay, so this, I guess, is just explaining all of the things that had been built. Like, yes, the temple was involved, the palace was involved, but there were also these other projects that Solomon oversaw the construction of. Supporting terraces. Hebrew says the Millo. Also in 924, the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain. So then this one town had actually been given to Pharaoh's daughter, and because Solomon had married Pharaoh's daughter, he, he probably wants it to look good for her. But note there after Tamar, alternate reading in the Masoretic text reads Tadmor. Which I would imagine that has a bit of a different meaning, but if the Masoretic text is the only one that has that, then in their efforts to translate from the, older documents, they might have just gone with what most of the rest of them said. Note there are chariots and horses. Okay, could have said charioteers rather than horses. Either way. Chariots and methods or whatever of using them, because you can't really use a chariot without horses or charioteers. So yeah, all that stuff was built under Solomon's watch. Then let's move on to verse 20. There were still some people living in the land who were not Israelites, including Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These were descendants of the nations whom the people of Israel had not completely destroyed. So Solomon conscripted them as slaves, and they serve as forced laborers to this day, meaning when this was written. But Solomon did not conscript any of the Israelites for forced labor. Instead, he assigned them to serve as fighting men, government officials, officers, and captains in his army, commanders of his chariots, and charioteers. Solomon appointed 550 of them to supervise the people working on his various projects. Okay, I will pause there for a bit. So apparently, all of this forced labor that Solomon oversaw was done not by the Israelites themselves, but all the other people groups in the land that they had conquered. And instead, the Israelites were either overseeing that or part of the army instead. Which, I mean, yeah, I suppose if there's an option, you want to look out for your own people first. I could see some people questioning, well, then how is ancient Israel in doing all this any better than, like, the Egyptians were enslaving the Israelites? I guess it's one of those things where, I guess in the case of Egypt enslaving the Israelites, like, they didn't really have much of an excuse for doing so. Like, their reason was purely selfish, and they hadn't, like, in this case, at least Israel had conquered these lands already, and so they kind of had a right to rule over these people and kind of say, hey, we defeated you in battle, so if you don't want us to kill you as well, we're gonna have you help us with this stuff. Whereas for Egypt, it was purely just like jealousy and thinking these people are a threat, so we're gonna put them down on the totem pole. And the way that it was carried out might have been different as well. Let's not forget that possibility. So, let me look at the note here. Hebrew term used here refers to the complete consecration of things to the... Ah, yes, that term that we saw a lot in, like, the times of Moses and Joshua, essentially. So, I mean, yes, some of the things were actually destroyed. Some of them might not have been destroyed, but instead, like, given to the priests or otherwise dedicated to God in some way. In any case, okay, it's those people groups that made up the labor force for all these building projects that we read about in the past couple of verses. Okay. On to verse 24. Solomon moved his wife, Pharaoh's daughter, from the city of David to the new palace he had built for her. Then he constructed the supporting terraces. 3 times each year, Solomon presented burnt offerings and peace offerings on the altar he had built for the Lord. He also burned incense to the Lord. And so he finished the work of building the temple. King Solomon also built a fleet of ships at Ezion-Geber, a port near Elath, in the island of Edom, in the land of Edom, along the shore of the Red Sea. Hiram sent experienced crews of sailors to sail the ships with Solomon's men. They sailed to Ophir and brought back to Solomon some 16 tons of gold. 16 tons, holy cow. Hebrew says 420 talents, which, when it mentioned gold earlier, it said 9,000 pounds. 120 talents, so, I mean, each 1,000 pounds is a ton, right? So that was 9 tons, 120 talents. 420 talents for, I mean, very quick mental math, that, like, kind of checks out. Not that I figured it wouldn't, just, anyway. Note there near Elath or Eleth, I don't know. That's, as in the Greek version, Hebrew spells it Eloth. But it might have been more widely known as Elath, so they might have just gone with the more popular spelling there. Red Sea, Hebrew says the Sea of Reeds. They probably knew it as the Sea of Reeds, but in later times, when it became known as the Red Sea, they started identifying it as the Red Sea in translations, so the more modern readers would have a better idea of where that this is happening. So, temple's done. I guess Solomon and Pharaoh's daughter moved to the palace that had been built. Although it says the new palace he had built for her. Was that the same as his palace, or was this a different one that might have been built in Gezer? Because it said that was a gift to Pharaoh's daughter. Anyway. Solomon presented burnt offerings 3 times a year in an effort to keep up with God's commands. So Israel also gained a fleet at this point. And I guess partially due to the agreement Solomon and Hiram had, Hiram sent some of his men to help Solomon's, because Hiram's were more experienced with sailing. Maybe later on, Solomon's men could handle it on their own. But anyway, so kind of an overview of the building projects, kind of some more details on what happened, how it happened, and other things like that. Also, Israel has a fleet now, a naval fleet. And yeah, that's what we get in 1 Kings chapter 9. Alright, so I think really this chapter is just sort of a broad overview of some of Solomon's projects, accomplishments, whatever you want to call them. You know, after finishing up the building projects that he had initiated and some other things that he did as well that weren't necessarily directly related to the buildings, but I guess kind of almost more... I mean, the stuff with the naval fleet was kind of almost more military related, but otherwise building things up to make Israel a strong nation. But anyway, that's kind of all we get for this chapter. So as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel so you can easily see more of my videos as I post them. Look down in the description for links to my social media pages. And down below that, leave comments with any thoughts you have. So that'll do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.